The auction hall went silent the moment the king rose from his throne, and no one in that frozen crowd expected his eyes to stop on the girl at the very end of the line, the one draped in a torn grey cloak, the one the guards had shoved to the back because she was too plain, too broken, too unworthy of a king's gaze. They called her the ugly duckling of the mating auction, a girl with a scarred cheek and downcast eyes, standing among rows of radiant she-wolves dressed in silk and pride, each one trained since childhood to catch an alpha's attention. Nobody in that hall believed a king as powerful and merciless as Alpha Draven Ashcroft would waste a single breath on her. And yet, when his voice finally broke the silence and he pointed toward her, gasps rippled through the crowd like wildfire, because what he was about to discover beneath that torn cloak would shatter everything the kingdom thought it knew about beauty, worth, and fate itself. If you believe in second chances, if you believe that kindness can outshine cruelty even in the darkest of places, take a moment right now to like this video, leave a comment below, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Duchess of Secrets, because stories like this one are just beginning. The mating auction had been a tradition of the Ashcroft Kingdom for 300 years, a brutal ceremony where the strongest alpha of the land chose his Luna from among the eligible she-wolves gathered from every pack. It was meant to be a celebration, but for the girls forced onto that stage, it was closer to a public trial. Elira Voss had never wanted to be there. She stood at the very end of the line only because a pack alpha had ordered every unclaimed woman between 18 and 25 to attend, and defiance meant banishment into the wilds where rogue wolves hunted the weak. She kept her hood low, her shoulders curved inward, trying to disappear into the shadows the way she always had since the fire that scarred half her face and killed her parents when she was 12. The other girls whispered when they thought she couldn't hear, calling her cursed, calling her a stain on the auction's beauty, wondering aloud why the elders even bothered bringing her. Elira had long since stopped flinching at those words. She had built walls around her heart brick by brick, telling herself that pain only hurt if you still expected the world to be kind. Alpha Draven Ashcroft had ruled for 6 years since his father's death, and in that time he had become a legend of iron discipline and unreadable silence. He was young for a king, only 28, but his eyes carried the weight of 100 battles, and few in his court had ever seen him smile. Every year the elders pressured him to choose a Luna, and every year he refused, watching row after row of perfect, polished women parade before him with a growing weariness in his chest. He had learned that the ones who curtsied lowest and smiled widest were often the ones who wanted his crown more than they wanted him. So when he walked the length of the auction floor that evening, his gaze moving over silk gowns and painted lips without a flicker of interest, he expected nothing different this time either. Then he saw her. She was not trying to be seen at all, which was precisely why he noticed her. While every other girl arched her back and lifted her chin to catch his attention, this one kept her eyes fixed on the floor as though she were praying to become invisible. The torn hem of her cloak, the calloused hands peeking from her sleeves, the way she trembled slightly when the guard nudged her forward, told a story that had nothing to do with vanity and everything to do with survival. Draven felt something shift inside his chest, an old instinct he had buried under years of duty, the same instinct that had once told him which soldiers would break under pressure and which ones would rise. He walked toward her, and the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. When he lifted her chin with 2 fingers, gently, the way no one had touched her in over a decade, Elira flinched and tried to pull away, certain this was some cruel joke arranged by the girls who despise her. But his hold was steady, not forceful, and when their eyes finally met, something passed between them that neither could name. The scar along her cheek ran from her temple to her jaw, pale and jagged, and instead of disgust, Draven felt an ache he did not expect, a recognition of pain that mirrored the scars he carried on the inside where no one could see. He asked for her name, his voice quieter than the court had ever heard it, and when she whispered it back, barely audible, he announced to the stunned assembly that she would be his choice. The hall erupted into chaos. Nobles murmured behind gloved hands, certain the king had lost his senses or was making some political statement they couldn't yet decipher. The other girls stared at her with a mixture of fury and disbelief, and Elira herself stood frozen, waiting for the cruel twist, the moment someone would laugh and tell her it was all a mistake. But no such moment came. Instead, guards approached to escort her toward the castle, and for the first time in years, Elira Voss felt the ground shift beneath her feet, not knowing whether she was walking toward salvation or a new kind of danger. The weeks that followed were not easy. The castle staff treated her with a coldness bordering on cruelty, certain that a scarred orphan from a minor pack had somehow tricked their king into choosing her out of pity rather than genuine interest. Servants left her meals cold and her chambers unlit, whispering just loud enough for her to hear that she would never truly be Luna, that Draven would come to his senses and cast her aside once the novelty wore off. Elira endured it in silence, the same way she had endured every hardship since childhood, believing deep down that perhaps they were right, that she was only a passing curiosity to a king bored of perfection. But Draven surprised her again and again. He saw her out in the quiet hours after council meetings, not to discuss politics or duty, but simply to ask about her day, about the herbs she grew in the small garden she had claimed behind the east wing, about the way she hummed old lullabies while she worked that reminded her of her mother. He noticed things others overlooked, the way she flinched near open flames, the way she avoided mirrors, the way her hands sometimes trembled when she thought no one was watching. Rather than turning away from these fractures in her, he leaned closer, patient in a way that slowly, painfully, began to crack the wall she had spent a lifetime building. It was on a stormy evening, 3 months into her stay at the castle, that everything changed. Elira had wandered into the old library seeking solitude, and there she found Draven alone, staring into the fire with the same haunted expression she often wore herself. Without meaning to, she asked him what troubled a king who held every kind of power a person could want. He was quiet for a long moment before admitting that power had never been the thing he wanted, that he had watched his own father transform into someone cold and hollow chasing strength, and that he feared becoming the same man. He confessed that the moment he saw her in that auction line, he hadn't seen a broken girl at all, but someone who understood what it meant to survive something that should have destroyed you, and keep walking anyway. For the first time since the fire that took her family, Elira wept in front of another person, not from grief, but from the astonishing relief of being truly seen. Word of the growing bond between the king and his chosen Luna spread through the kingdom, and not everyone welcomed it. A rival noble family, the Halloways, had spent years positioning their daughter Serafini as the inevitable future Luna, and Elira's unexpected selection threatened alliances they had built through careful manipulation. Serafini, beautiful and calculating, began a quiet campaign to undermine Elira, spreading rumors that she was using dark magic to enchant the king, that her scars were proof of a curse rather than an accident, that no true Luna should look upon the pack with a face like hers. The whispers grew louder in the halls, and Elira found herself facing the same cruelty from her childhood, now dressed in royal politics instead of playground taunts. The breaking point came during the Harvest Moon Festival, an event attended by every allied pack in the region, where Elira was expected to stand publicly at Draven's side for the first time as his intended Luna. Serafini orchestrated a moment of humiliation, arranging for Elira's hood to be pulled back in front of the entire gathering, exposing her scarred face to hundreds of unfamiliar wolves who gasped and murmured exactly the way the auction crowd once had. For a moment, Elira felt every childhood wound reopen at once, the shame, the isolation, the certainty that she would never be enough. She turned to flee the courtyard, tears blurring her vision, ready to disappear the way she always had. But Draven's voice stopped her before she reached the gate, carrying across the stunned silence of the courtyard with a force that made every wolf present stand at attention. He did not comfort her privately or quietly excuse the moment. Instead, he walked to where she stood trembling, took her hand in front of everyone, and told the gathered packs the truth of what happened at the auction months before, how he had chosen her not despite her scars but because of the strength it took to survive whatever had caused them. He spoke of the fire that killed her family, information she had only ever shared with him in confidence, and instead of exposing her weakness, he transformed it into a testament to her resilience. He declared that a Luna's worth was never measured by unmarked skin but by the courage carried beneath it, and that any wolf who could not see there had no place questioning the strength of their king's chosen mate. The courtyard remained silent for a long moment before an elder from a distant allied pack stepped forward, an old wolf named Garrick who had fought in the same wars as Draven's father. He knelt before Elira, an act of respect rarely given so publicly, and told her that true alphas throughout history had always recognized strength the crowd was too blind to see, and that her scars would become a symbol other wounded wolves could look to for hope rather than shame. One by one, other pack leaders followed his example, until Serafini and her family stood alone in their contempt, exposed for the cruelty they had orchestrated. It was in that courtyard, surrounded by wolves who had once mocked her, that Elira finally understood she was not the ugly duckling the world had labeled her. She was simply a swan who had never been given the chance to see her own reflection clearly. In the months that followed, Elira's transformation was not about her scars fading or her face changing, but about the way she began to carry herself, shoulders back, eyes lifted, no longer apologizing for the space she occupied in the world. She used her position not to seek revenge against those who had wronged her, but to establish sanctuaries for orphaned and injured wolves across the kingdom, places where children who had survived fires, attacks, or abandonment could find the same second chance she had been given. Draven stood beside her at every ceremony, every dedication, watching the girl he had chosen in a moment of quiet instinct become a Luna whose compassion reshaped the very culture of their kingdom. The auction tradition itself was eventually reformed under their rule, no longer a display of superficial beauty, but a gathering where character and strength of spirit were what truly mattered. If this story touched something inside you, if it reminded you that the parts of yourself you've hidden away in shame might actually be your greatest strength, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that their scars do not disqualify them from being loved. Your support means more than you know, and it helps stories like Elira's reach the people who need them most. Before we reach the final moment of this story, I want to ask you something important. Comment below with just one word that describes what you needed to hear today, whether it's hope, strength, worth, or simply love, and know that wherever you are reading this from, you are not invisible, and you are not unworthy of a love that sees you fully. Years later, when Elira stood on the same auction platform where she had once been mocked and dismissed, now presiding over the ceremony as queen alongside Draven, she watched a new generation of young wolves brought forward, some polished and confident, others hiding in the shadows the way she once had. She made a point, every single year, of walking to the end of that line first, kneeling before whichever trembling girl stood furthest from the light, and telling her gently that the world's definition of worth had always been too small to hold the truth of who she really was. In the warmth of Draven's hand always finding hers during that moment, Elira understood that the greatest twist of her story was never that a king had chosen an ugly duckling. It was that she had finally learned to see the swan that had always been there, waiting patiently beneath the scars, for someone brave enough to look closer.